Okay, I'm hoping that we have enough. We currently do not have a quorum. So we'll wait another minute or so. Okay, it looks like we have a quorum. I'd like to start the meeting. This is the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, our regular meeting. Today's date is September 8th, 2022. I'd like to call the meeting to order with the roll call. Vice Chair Commissioner Jekowitz.
Here.
Commissioner Burns.
Here.
Commissioner Hughes.
Present.
Commissioner Ponce.
Present.
Thank you. And Commissioner Tolliver.
I'm here.
Thank you. And I understand that Commissioner Cox will be running a little bit late today and joining us. And I'll announce that when we come, when he gets here. I am Commissioner Chairman Wong. We do have a quorum. Let me start with the Governor Pritzker stuff. In 2020, Governor Pritzker signed Public Act 101-0640, making certain amendments to the Open Meetings Act so that we, along with other boards and commissions, can continue to host virtual meetings during the COVID-19 public health emergency, provided that certain conditions are met. One of those conditions is that I, as head of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, determine that an in-person meeting of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks and its Permit Review Committee are not practical or prudent. I'd like to make sure our virtual meeting meets all the conditions of the Open Meetings Act as amended. Therefore, I am making a determination pursuant to Section 7E2 of the Open Meetings Act that an in-person meeting of this Commission on Chicago Landmarks and its Permit Review Committee is not practical or prudent. Similarly, I'm also making a determination pursuant to Section 7E5 that because of the disaster as declared by the governor, it is unfeasible for at least one member of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks or its chief administrative officer or its chief legal officer to be physically present at the meeting place for either meeting. Pursuant to a resolution adopted by the Commission on Chicago Landmarks on June 4th, 2020, regarding the chairman's emergency rulemaking powers, I issued emergency rules governing the conduct of remote public commission meetings and provisions for remote public participation, effective February 18th, 2022. These rules were posted on the Commission's website. In line with these emergency rules, today's regular Commission meeting is a virtual meeting being simulcast to the general public via live streaming. Commission meetings have been held virtually since May of 2020. Meetings are structured to minimize the chances for technical difficulties. Members of the general public have been encouraged to submit written statements in advance of the meeting, and these have been posted on the Commission's website and are available for viewing during the virtual meeting at www.chicago.gov /CCL. Further emergency rules, verbal statements by the general public for all agenda items will take place at the beginning of the meeting so that all those wishing to speak at today's meeting should be signed in to the Zoom meeting at this time. Before we hear staff presentations on the agenda items, after which we will ask to hear from owners or applicants and their teams, we will open the floor up to the members of the general public who wish to comment about the items to be heard in today's agenda. We're asking the comments should pertain only to the agenda items. Members of the general public wishing to comment should use the raise hand function of Zoom to indicate they wish to speak. Members of the public not connecting via computer or smartphone and instead phoning into the meeting should press *9 and activate the raise hand function and do the same to deactivate it. I or the meeting facilitator will call out the names one by one and unmute those people. Once unmuted, speakers should give their full name and organization, if any, if they represent. Each speaker is allotted 3 minutes to speak. Once all members of the public wishing to make a comment have been given the opportunity to do so, we'll go through the agenda. I'll ask that owners or applicants and their representatives, as well as aldermen, wait to speak until after the staff presentations have been made on their agenda item. We'll call on you then. Are there members of the general public who'd like to make comments on the agenda item 2, the preliminary landmark recommendation for the Century Building at 202 South State Street? So, Mansour, is there?
Chairman, we have several people. The first person is James McKay.
Okay, Mr. Mackey, the floor is yours.
Myself, there we go. Thank you very much. My name is James McKay, and I'm simply speaking as a concerned citizen. And I assume I'm only supposed to talk about this issue. My comments are the same for this as well as the next agenda item. And very shortly, I just want to express concern about support for landmarking this building, both of these buildings at 202 South State and 220 South State, because I have concerns about the foundational integrity of other buildings on the block, such as 17 West Monroe, which houses the Berghoff restaurant. And I'm concerned if those buildings come down, will they compromise the foundations or other parts of the buildings that may be leaning against it, number one. And number two, I'm concerned about the overall integrity of the State Street street wall that may be compromised or be lost or be given big gaps into the along the rest of the State Street. So with those two thoughts in mind, I wanted to offer those thoughts. I totally support landmarking both of these buildings. And just a question, do I need to repeat these comments for the next item, or can I do an I bid? Just if that's appropriate to let me know, whatever.
No, you've indicated that these comments are for both.
Great, I appreciate that. I think we all do. Thank you very much. I'm complete.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Our next speaker is Mr. Ward Miller.
Mr. Miller, floor is yours.
Chairman Wong, can you hear me?
We sure can.
Well, good afternoon, Chairman Wong and members of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. My name is Ward Miller. I'm Executive Director of Preservation Chicago. And Mr. Chairman, and all, our testimony is for both items number 2 and 3 for the Century and Consumers buildings. We at Preservation Chicago highly encourage the Chicago landmark designation of the Century and Consumers buildings located on the site bounded by State, Adams, and Quincy Court, and part of the Loop Retail National Register District. Constructed in 1913 and 1915, the Century and Consumers buildings were designed by architects Halliburton and Roche and Jenny Mundy and Jensen, which are both two seminal firms recognized on the world stage. Both architectural firms, along with others, including Adler and Sullivan and Burnham and Root, worked with new experimental materials and were among the designers of some of the earliest tall buildings in what has become known as the Chicago School of Architecture, also known as the Chicago commercial style. This period, extending from 1884 to 1915, has been recognized as one of Chicago's great contributions to world architecture and the beginnings of what is recognized as the origins of the skyscraper. We also recognize these two structures as the last of the early Chicago skyscraper buildings of the Chicago School. So these buildings are extremely important to this movement as well as world architecture. This is such a highly regarded period of Chicago's built environment that in 2017, Preservation Chicago, along with many of our architecture and preservation partners, nominated 9 buildings in downtown Chicago as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The list of 9 buildings nominated by members of Chicago's architecture community has the ability to be expanded in the future to also include additional skyscraper structures. We would hope that this honor would be extended to the Century and Consumers Building as well, especially if they are given Chicago landmark designation. This UNESCO World Heritage nomination is a great opportunity to once again highlight the early tall buildings of Chicago on the world stage in a world-class city, and also greatly increase visitors and tourism to Chicago, as these are recognized as places on earth that are an outstanding universal value to humanity. However, we were informed by Jan C.K. Anderson of US ICOMOS that if these buildings are demolished, that will harm this nomination. So we are very much in support at Preservation Chicago of the Chicago landmark designation of these buildings. You have 23,000 signatures on a change.org petition and a B1M video storyboard that has been viewed by 880,000 people around the world that want to see these buildings landmarked and protected. Thank you so much, and we look forward to the designation of these buildings as Chicago landmarks.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Sorry, our next speaker is Mary Lou Seidel.
There you go. Floor is yours.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Great. Thank you, commissioners, for this opportunity to speak before you in support of landmarking the Century and Consumers Buildings on South State Street. My name is Mary Lou Seidel. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for Preservation Chicago. You understand the architectural significance of these buildings and their importance to Chicago's international renown for our early skyscrapers. I will focus my testimony today on 2 areas: the economic advantage of keeping these buildings intact and landmarked, and addressing the concern about safety at the federal courthouse building. 4 local economic development organizations wrote letters in support of saving the Century and Consumers Buildings. The Chicago Loop Alliance, South Loop Neighbors, Chicago Central Area Committee, and Loop Neighbors wrote a letter to U.S. Senator Dick Durbin expressing support for the retention and reuse of these 2 significant buildings. In their letter, they highlighted the buildings are part of the Loop Retail Historic District on the National Register of Historic Places, enabling the use of federal and potentially state historic tax credits for rehabilitation. A 2019 RFP to redevelop these buildings would have resulted in at least a $200 million reinvestment by today's dollars, generating at least $2 million in property taxes annually. The redevelopment of these key buildings were expected to elevate redevelopment of State Street south all the way to the Ida B. Wells Drive. Investment in historic buildings makes good economic sense. It protects our city's history, and it offers more people the opportunity to view authentic historic spaces. Demolishing these buildings would be a tragic loss to the history of Chicago, our skyscraper legacy, and to echo the comments of James McCrae, the State Street street wall. The demolition of these historic structures, as Mr. McCrae also noted, could potentially compromise the Berghoff Restaurant's 1870s era foundation. As for the welfare and the safety of judges and staff at the federal courthouse, we agree heartily that this is paramount to offer extraordinary support to protect those who work daily to advance the principles of our judicial system. However, it is unreasonable and excessive to demolish 2 historic buildings when technological advancements allow for a more exact response to specific threats. We thank the Commission on Chicago Landmarks and Historic Preservation Division staff for bringing this landmark nomination up for consideration. We support this landmarking heartily, and we look forward to working with the City of Chicago, the local economic development organizations, and the GSA to advance preservation positive solutions for these remarkable buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Lou.
Our next speaker is Preservation Chicago.
Thank you.
Hi, Adam Natanshone. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Hi, this is Adam Natanshone. My name is Adam Natanshone. I'm Director of Operations for Preservation Chicago. Thank you for the opportunity to address the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. Preservation Chicago, as you've heard from my colleague strongly supports the Chicago landmark designation of the Century Consumers Buildings. Bravo to the commission for your attention to them today. These significant buildings were Preservation Chicago's 7 most endangered in 2011, 2013, and again in 2022. It would be tragic if the Century Consumers Buildings were to be demolished, and Chicago would lose much more than just the terracotta buildings. Early Chicago skyscrapers are currently under consideration for UNESCO World Heritage Site. A Century Consumers Building demolition would jeopardize eligibility for this extraordinary designation, the international recognition, and the economic windfall of heritage tourism. The plight of Century Consumers Buildings has captured the attention of people across Chicago, the nation, and the world, and the outpouring of support is truly remarkable. Our Change.org petition has generated 23,108 signatures, or 492 pages of signatures, plus an additional 140 comments. These numbers are impressive, but are dwarfed by the B1M short film, which has generated a staggering 896,000 views. It is no exaggeration to say the world is watching. Since February 2022, there have been dozens of articles on the Century Consumers Buildings across Chicago's media, focusing on the threat, the history, and the adaptive reuse plan. Remarkably, there have been 3 Chicago Sun-Times editorials, all pro-preservation, with an editorial in support of Chicago landmark designation published just 2 days ago. In addition to the building's beauty, history, and prominence on one of Chicago's greatest streets, the overwhelming support might be tied to the creative win-win alternative. The Chicago Collaborative Archive Center is a viable win-win alternative that could achieve both security and preservation. In this scenario, everybody wins, nobody loses. The Archive Center plan calls for all rear windows to be bricked up. It's brilliant, creative, and its stakeholders, including over 20 national archives and universities, are highly motivated to proceed. It's true that the Century Consumers Buildings have suffered from deferred maintenance under the stewardship of the GSA, but the $52 million federal demolition earmark could be used instead to restore the buildings. It's hard to know what the true cost of restoration would be, but to offer some perspective, Lane Tech was recently restored inside and out. Lane Tech is the largest school in Chicago at over 600,000 square feet. This is more than double the combined square footage of Century Consumers. They replaced 6,000 feet of masonry parapets, restored and replaced 15,000 terracotta pieces, new roof, new windows, total cost, $52 million. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Adam.
Our next speaker is Holly Fiedler.
Can you hear me?
We sure can. The floor is yours, Holly.
Chairman and committee, thank you. My name is Holly Fiedler, and I am a member of the Chicago Collaborative Archive Center. The historic value of these buildings has been made by Ward Miller of Preservation Chicago and many others. Demolition of these buildings would be a tragic eyesore for the downtown and disservice to the history of Chicago architecture, as well as a loss to the downtown economy and loss for future positive endeavors. Demolition of these buildings will remove Chicago's nomination of early Chicago skyscrapers to become a UNESCO World Heritage Center. This is a very significant loss to the city for tourism who bring money and interest into the city. The Chicago Collaborative Archive Center would preserve the historic nature of these buildings, stabilize them, bring them back into positive use, and meet the security needs for the GSA and feds. The Chicago Collaborative Archive Center, the CCAC, has had communications with the GSA and asked formally to proceed. Security is of the highest concern to the CCAC, whose collections are irreplaceable. A limited staff with board approval and security clearances would be in the buildings. Visitors would make a reservation, pass security checks, and be escorted to individually locked floors and collections. The buildings would require multi-layer access control, security personnel, surveillance security systems, scaled zones of security throughout the buildings, security policies, and an incident response plan. The CCAC is committed to work with the GSA to find the best possible security for the site. We welcome the GSA as a partner. The GSA would have a could have a security center located in the base of the Consumers Building fronting Quincy Court. This would help ensure that both the collections as well as the Federal Center are secure at all times. These buildings are worth saving, and we ask for you to help us by permitting preliminary landmark status. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Fiedler. For the record, I'd like to note that Commissioner Cox has joined.
Our next speaker is another person from Preservation Chicago.
Hi there, can you hear me all right?
We can, if you could state your name and.
Yeah, good afternoon to the commission. This is Max Chavez, Director of Research and Special Projects at Preservation Chicago. I just want to join the chorus of voices on this hearing today that are speaking out in support of the official landmarking of the Century and Consumers buildings. There's so many reasons why these buildings are crucial parts of the Loop's built environment and why their destruction should never come to pass. And many of those, it seems like it'll be touched on today. But I just wanted to take some time to focus a little bit more on the architectural significance of these two buildings. In most instances, the superlative of being the first or the earliest of something is often cited as proof of a place's significance. But in this situation, it's sort of the opposite. The Century and Consumers buildings represent the final years of the Chicago School of Architecture. This is that legendary era in Chicago's built environment that had repercussions all across the world. While the Chicago School certainly has its aesthetic importances, I think it's really important here to understand the Chicago School and its embrace of the steel frame skeleton as a massive step forward in structural engineering, especially with regards to the completion of William LeBaron Jenney's home insurance building in 1885, which is often pointed to as the first true skyscraper. So while the buildings of the Chicago School are indeed beautiful, it's important to remember that they and the movement at large are responsible for why our cities look the way that they do today. So these two structures, especially as a pairing together, are testaments to the final years of maybe Chicago's most important architectural movement and how that movement evolved over time and what was to come next for Chicago's architecture. Within that world of the Chicago School, numerous firm names came to prominence, but arguably none are more prolific than the pairing of Halliburton and Roche, who were the architects of the Century Building. William Halliburton and Martin Roche together were responsible for a dizzying amount of buildings in the Loop, many of which are already official Chicago landmarks. There's the Marquette Building, the southern half of the Monadnock, the University Club Building, the Chicago City Hall, Palmer House. I mean, the list goes on and on. At the same time, the Consumers Building was designed by its own prominent firm, William LeBaron Jenney, William Bryce Mundy, and Elmer C. Jensen, or Jenney, Mundy, and Jensen for short. Although Jenney had passed by the time of the Consumers Building construction, his presence still looms large here given his status as the father of the skyscraper. And meanwhile, Mundy and Jensen were both accomplished architects in their own individual rights, with Mundy working for years as an architect of numerous Chicago public schools. And together, Mundy and Jensen were also the architects behind the Union Club Building, the Singer Building, and the Lakeview Building on Michigan Avenue. So the architectural pedigree associated with these two buildings is really extraordinary. Buildings of the Chicago School in the Loop, including buildings by Halliburton Roche and Jenney, Mundy, and Jensen, are all well represented by official Chicago landmark status. So, we at Preservation Chicago feel that extending official landmark designation to the Century and Consumers buildings is really the one clear and logical outcome here, as the precedent has been set many, many times over. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Chavez.
Our next speaker is Margot Dumel.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, thank you for letting me speak. My name is Margot Dumel. I'm a private citizen. I'm speaking in favor of agenda item number 5, the citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application for Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church.
Can I ask you to speak at that time? I will call for comments regarding that item. Is there anybody else for the Century Building at 202 South State or the Consumer Building at 220 South State?
We have Kendra Parzan.
Good afternoon, Chairman Wong and members of the commission. My name is Kendra Parzan, and I recently joined the staff of Landmarks Illinois as the Chicago Area Advocacy Manager. Going forward, I'll be taking over from Lisa DeCura as Landmarks Illinois' primary representative before your commission. I'm glad to have the opportunity to introduce myself today and to share a statement of support for the preliminary landmark designation at the Century Building at 202 South State Street and the Consumers Building at 220 South State Street, items 2 and 3 on today's agenda. First, thank you to the Commission for requesting that the Historic Preservation staff of DPD prepare the preliminary summary of information reports for the Century and Consumers Buildings. As stated in the joint letter of support submitted in advance of this meeting by Landmarks Illinois and the National Trust for Historic Preservation, our organization strongly supports the conclusion that these buildings meet eligibility requirements to be designated Chicago landmarks and urge the Commission to vote in favor of preliminary landmark designation. Earlier this year, Landmarks Illinois included the Century and Consumers Buildings in its 2022 list of the most endangered historic places in Illinois, due to threat of demolition by their owner, the U.S. General Services Administration, which contends that the buildings must be demolished in order to address security concerns at the nearby Everett M. Dirksen U.S. Courthouse. We believe that demolition of the Century and Consumers Buildings is not necessary to address security concerns at the Dirksen Courthouse, and that demolition of these historically significant buildings would leave a prominent hole in Chicago's most important downtown retail corridor. As the General Services Administration considers these buildings for demolition, designating them as City of Chicago landmarks sends a strong statement in favor of their retention and reuse. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Cynthia Olson.
Hello and thank you. I'm Cynthia Varanis Olson. I'm an architect, director of the Mies van der Rohe Society, and a professor at the College of Architecture, Illinois Institute of Technology, speaking in favor of landmarking the Century and Consumers Buildings. Mies van der Rohe worked in context to these historic Century and Consumers Buildings, which surround the Chicago Federal Center. Mies's mastery extends beyond his glass curtain wall and plaza and engages the buildings of these Chicago School of Architecture buildings. The Halliburton Roach Century Building and the Jenny Mundy and Jensen Consumers Building have an important proximity and relationship to the Federal Center buildings and contribute, along with the solids and voids of these open spaces, to the feeling of buildings in motion. This gives the whole area a quality of vibrancy and energy. On Mies, while developing plans always stressed the surroundings, Mies's planning had a great deal to do with monumental architectural forms within the context of an urban built environment. The two buildings in question here should have much to do, in my opinion, with the future plans as they evolve, but in the context with development of the area and the city as a very important part of Chicago's historic fabric. These two tall and elegant buildings were once part of a thriving and vibrant State Street retail area. There is no reason why this should not continue. These buildings are employed together with Mies's, as they are employed with Mies's, obtain effective contrasts. As we view the Century and Consumers Buildings and their textural effects against Mies's shiny steel and glass, we are reminded of how minute differences in textural character affect our brains so strongly. The Consumers and Century Buildings are an important reminder of and connection to our past while providing for a vibrant future. To experience this architecture, planning, and spaces as a whole in their urban Chicago context is stunningly beautiful, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And our last speaker is Julie Savicki.
Ms. Savicki?
Yes, good afternoon. Can you hear me?
Yes, we sure can.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong and commissioners. I am, of course, testifying in favor of the landmarking of the Century and Consumers Buildings on State Street. Prior speakers have already testified to their significance to Chicago, its historical value, as well as its architectural value. And, you know, Chicago is the city known for its architecture. And, you know, my comments today are going to focus really about landmarking itself. I am very concerned as president of the Society of St. Adalbert's. I think some of you may remember me, that a lot of our buildings, such as these and St. Adalbert's, that are orange rated and have been on the list as orange rated for, I don't know, 25, 35 years when that list was compiled. I worry that we're not acting fast enough in landmarking some of these buildings. I was actually very surprised to see that the Century and Consumers buildings haven't already been landmarked, and here we are today where it's in potential jeopardy. No different than St. Adalbert's. I don't know if there is an opportunity for us to perhaps expand the Landmark Commission and move a lot of these beautiful and significant buildings into landmarking a lot sooner. We with St. Adalbert's have been waiting for over 3 years for that to be landmarked, and now it's being dismantled, as I'm sure you know. So I encourage the commissioners to think of all of us that are really, raising the red flag and beating the drums to safeguard these buildings, because if we don't, we won't be known as a city of architecture. We won't have buildings to landmark. And I think this country doesn't think strongly enough about preservation. We're a very young country. The Midwest is younger than other parts of the country. It seems to me on the East Coast, they take preservation more seriously. And I encourage all of you to do what's right and think about the bigger picture here. And I encourage you to, move forward aggressively and diligently with the landmarking of all of these buildings because it's very much needed for the future of this city. I would hate to see any of this destroyed. So I thank all of you for your time. And I also encourage you to make St. Adalbert's a priority. Thank you again.
Thank you, Ms. Savicki.
There are no more hands raised here.
Okay. I'm anticipating that, well, I assume that the speakers that have spoken on the item number 2 also were speaking on item number 3. Unless there is somebody that disagrees with that, I'm going to take them as the comments for both item number 2 as well as number 3. But I will also give the opportunity for anybody who just did want to talk on specifically on item number 3, the opportunity, the consumer building at 220 South State, to speak up now, or we will continue on with the public comments. If not, okay. I'd like to call for members of the general public who'd like to comment on the 4th agenda item, the citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application for the Onleong Merchants Association building at 2216 South Wentworth Avenue. Do we have speakers for that?
I don't see any hands raised, Chair. We have Ward Miller.
Mr. Miller, go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Ward Miller of Preservation Chicago. I want to speak in favor of the Adopt a Landmark funds and grant from the city of Chicago to the Onleong Merchants Association building, and also item number 5, Ebenezer Baptist Church. These are both remarkable buildings representing 2 very diverse communities on Chicago's South Side, one in Chinatown and one in the greater Bronzeville district. And the Onleong Merchants Association building is such an iconic building in Chicago's Chinatown and on its historic street, Wentworth, and it's an important part of that street wall in what we know as Chinatown, in the Armour Square Bridgeport community, as it's known as in the Chicago Historic Resources Survey. So we want to again promote this Adopt a Landmark grant, which is really so wonderful in a way of ensuring these buildings, our Chicago landmarks, continue on in perpetuity. We also want to recognize Ebenezer Baptist Church. This is one of the last commissions of Dankmar Adler, a partner of Louis Sullivan that built the Auditorium Building, the Chicago Stock Exchange, the Schiller Building, also known as the Garrick. There's an amazing exhibition on the Garrick that is circulating. It's currently now at the Richard H. Driehaus Museum, which we've been a part of. And previously it was at Wrightwood 659 Gallery. You know, the importance of Dankmar Adler should never be overlooked. And together, the partnership of Adler and Sullivan was one of the great architectural firms of the 19th and 19th century in Chicago and in the United States. So we very much support the Adopt the Landmark funds being granted to these two really wonderful and important buildings, which are sometimes forgotten in the larger picture of what we view as our great landmarks of Chicago, but they certainly are among those great buildings. So we wholeheartedly endorse the granting of Adopt the Landmark funds to these two buildings, items number 4 and 5 on today's agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Is there anybody else who'd like to speak on item number 4, the Adopt a Landmark application for the Onleong Merchants Association?
No other hands raised.
Okay, let's go on to item number 5, the Adopt a Landmark Fund application for the Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church at 4501 South Vincennes Avenue.
I don't see any hands raised, Chairman.
There was a previous speaker who had
oh, now we have 2 hands. The previous
Dumel.
Margot Dumel.
Okay.
It's Margot Demel. I'm speaking as a private citizen. Want to thank the commissioners for letting me testify today. I'm speaking in favor of agenda item number 5, the citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application for Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church in Ward 3. The churches in the city form the very foundation of our communities. Currently, churches are being torn down at a record pace. So it's very important to fund landmark status for all churches that are available. Again, that brings me back to the situation of St. Adalbert's. The Archdiocese of Chicago is closing and combining over 33% of their parishes, over 111 churches. So historical and architecturally important churches are being closed and torn down left and right. And in terms of St. Adalbert's and Pilsen, Honorable Maurice Cox promised the Pilsen community that the church would be landmarked years ago. So I don't know what the situation is with that. Why is there a delay in the process? The Archdiocese of Chicago has been allowed to let the church go into disrepair by not heating it for 3 years. They have been allowed to proceed with illegal work without valid permits to cut a hole in a masonry wall without reinforcements to remove a statue. So this is a very precarious situation for St. Adalbert's. I want to encourage the Landmark Commission to act with all due haste to landmark this building. It was considered the best use of marble of any church in Chicago by the architect Henry J. Schlags. It has 21 tons of hand-carved Carrara marble. It has a Tiffany stained glass half dome. It is considered, you know, a premier historical Polish expat church in the whole of the United States. It's very significant architecturally. Also, for the community, it is the heart and soul of Pilsen and connected to 1 million people in the Chicago area through their ancestors and relatives, and just so many people went to this church. It's a very important church. So I just want to thank you for letting me talk about this, the architectural landmarking of churches. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Chairman, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Commissioner.
This
Tolliver.
is not the first time someone from advocating for St. Albert's Church has hijacked an agenda item to talk about it. I would urge you to rule anyone else who attempts that in the future out of order.
Commissioner, I appreciate that. I have asked for folks to certainly respect the agenda items and speak only on the agenda items. That being said, there are some legal issues as to as far as the Open Meetings Act is concerned. But I appreciate your comments and will request that future public speakers speak to the agenda items respectfully. Thank you, sir. Is there another speaker for Ebenezer?
Chairman, we have Emily Nielsen.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me?
We can.
My name is Emily Nielsen, and I would like to speak in support of the Adopt a Landmark grant to Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church. This grant would assist a committed congregation to care for its historic place of worship and would recognize the value to the entire city of the preservation of architecturally significant sacred spaces. I do wish to be respectful of this commission and the agenda items, but I would like to take this opportunity to draw your attention to another Chicago landmark church, which shares with Ebenezer Baptist a location on the south side, a design in the neoclassical style, and a connection with the iconic Chicago firm of Adler and Sullivan. This church is also blessed with a committed congregation able to contribute significant funds every year towards its considerable restoration needs. I am speaking of the Shrine of Christ the King, landmarked as St. Gelasius in 2003 at 6401 South Woodlawn Avenue. As you know, a month ago now, the Archdiocese of Chicago suppressed the Institute of Christ the King in its jurisdiction, effectively banning public masses and other sacraments at the shrine. Since then, no religious services have been conducted, and the crisis of trust the Archdiocese has created in the donors to the restoration has only deepened. I am joining my colleagues who in August asked this commission to express its concern to the Archdiocese and to work with them and the Institute towards a resolution that will allow this preservation success story to continue. I understand that it is not the job of the Landmarks Commission to seek to redress injustice or unkindness within religious organizations. However, I do believe that the actions of the Archdiocese constitute a direct threat to the long-term preservation of this Chicago landmark. The Institute of Christ the King is an international Catholic religious order. They have a constitution approved by the Vatican, of which the Archdiocese was fully aware. First, when it invited them to Chicago in 2004 expressly to care for the shrine, and again in 2016 when they deeded them the building to spare it from demolition. The Archdiocese chose the Institute, and the Institute has been willing to take on a challenge that many would not. Critically, they have been able to attract a growing congregation whose donations form the backbone of the restoration funds that the shrine needs. The Institute cannot violate its constitution. We are asking the Landmarks Commission for its assistance in restoring the violated trust of the shrine's many supporters so that its restoration may continue.
Ms. Nielsen, you had indicated when you started that you would like to be respectful of this commission. You had just heard from Commissioner Tolliver. I am going to ask again for those who are not speaking on the agenda items of this commission on today's agenda to withhold your comments until the appropriate time of once your agenda item is called up in future commission meetings. Is there anybody else who would like to speak on Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church?
We have the last speaker, Julie Savicki.
Ms. Savicki, again, I'm going to ask you, if this is about St. Adalbert's, I'd really request for you to only speak to Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Commissioner Wong. Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Wong. And yes, of course, I am very delighted to hear about the funds that will be granted to Ebenezer Baptist Church for their restoration. And the only additional comment that I would like to make is this is really our only forum to speak to all of you commissioners directly. Outside of this forum, we have no way of really communicating with you and expecting responses. I have been emailing regarding issues related to St. Adalbert's and not getting any answers. So I apologize to the commission, and we are not trying to be respectful. Please understand that we are really fighting for something that is good for the city, and we'd like to get your attention on urgent matters. And outside of this forum, we really just don't quite know how to do that. And that's really my comment. Thank you again. And all of this meant with utter respect for all of you and what you do. Thank you.
It was very I know the congregation of Ebenezer, and that it was very disrespectful of each of you to abuse their integrity. That's all I have to say, and I will communicate to them what you have done and give them your names.
I would also like to comment that I will talk to staff about communications and other opportunities to outside of this forum to voice your thoughts. Is that all of the speakers, the public comments?
Yes, Chairman Wong. Ms. Julie Savicki again has her hand raised, but
I am not.
And we have Latanya Melton who just raised her hand. Do you wish to? Another person. Oh, she lowered her hand. Oh no, her hand is straight. Latanya Melton.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
I am from Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, and it has been so hard right now listening to three people take over and hijack something that we are working so hard for. This church is in the Bronzeville community, and we are definitely seeking that $900,000 in hopes of renovating our church. This church has been here since 1902. It's a Denmark Adler church. And it's the birthplace of gospel music, where so many other churches are going up in ruins because of fire and neglect. You have this one church still here in the community who has served so many people time and time again. We are respectfully asking. I am so upset that people have taken our time. We need this more than anything. We worked hard to establish ourselves in this community. It is with respect to the commission that you please help us in maintaining this statue here in the Bronzeville community. And I'm just like so overwhelmed because of what just happened. And I just want to say, like, this is monumental for us in this community. This was an Isaiah Temple church. We have beautiful stained glass windows. We have a beautiful pipe organ. And to see that all to be taken away because of neglect and everything else would be so detrimental to this community. So I just ask of you to listen to make the right decision and make sure that Ebenezer stays the landmark that it is. And we are, hopefully granted this money. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Milton.
Chairman, we have Reverend Daryl Person, who's actually part of the CCL 5 item.
Please go ahead. Floor is yours.
Good day, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me, sir?
We sure can, Ms. Person.
Thank you for taking the time to receive my comments. I just want to echo the comments of one of our loyal members of our faith community. Ebenezer has been in the Bronzeville community for over 120 years. And for over 120 years, we have made numerous contributions to our community. And we are at a place now where we're ready to go to the next level as we do the work that God has given unto our hands. As many of you know, Ebenezer is the birthplace of gospel music. Thomas Dorsey, A. Dorsey, started there at Ebenezer. And the first gospel choir was started at Ebenezer. Ebenezer has been a prominent institution for African Americans for a number of years. I support this commission, and I hope that you will confirm the grant for Ebenezer. I am certainly sensitive of the issues of other faith communities, but Ebenezer is on the agenda, and we have been standing on the wall for over 120 years right here on the corner of 45th and Vincennes. And as long as we are called to serve, we will be right here. Thank you for all that you are doing. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Reverend Person.
Chairman, we have Pat B. From the same CCL 5 project.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm also a member of Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, and I'm just going to be brief. I thank you for allowing us to legitimately use our time to speak up for our church. I won't repeat what our members and what our pastor has said, but I would certainly urge you to please help us, as Mrs. King said, to get this money to preserve our historic building. I would like to also take a minute to thank Mr. Ward Miller for speaking up with us. He was essential in helping us to get city landmark status. As it has been said before, we are the birthplace of gospel music, and we are the last synagogue. The building was the last synagogue that was designed and built by Dagmar Adler. And so for that reason also, we are an historic landmark and worthy of the preservation. So again, I don't want to keep repeating what everyone else has said, but we are trying very hard to preserve this building. We are participating in any kinds of venues that come our way to help us to restore and preserve this historic building. So we thank you for your support, and we hope that we will be able to fulfill all of the tenets of the Adopt a Landmark grant. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. V. Is there anybody else on this item?
No more hands raised, Chairman.
Okay. Before we proceed, I'd like to introduce a new member of the Historic Preservation Division staff, Tyler Taylor. Tyler graduated from the Illinois Institute of Technology with a Bachelor of Architecture degree. He worked as an architect and a building zoning code consultant before joining DPD's Historic Preservation Division. Welcome, Tyler, and we look forward to your assistance. And you got a
Hi,
great,
thank you.
Thank you. Is there anything further you'd like to tell us about yourself?
No, that covers it. I'm excited to be here and working with historic preservation, and looking forward to working with everyone else going forward.
Thank you, sir. Looking forward to it. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of the previous meeting on August 4th, 2022. Those were included in your packets. Is there a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved, Commissioner Burns.
Thank you, Commissioner Burns. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Cox?
Here, I was present since about 1:15. Thank you.
Okay, and you approve this The minutes?
I approve the minutes.
Thank you. Commissioner Hughes,
Yes, I approve the minutes.
Commissioner Ponce,
Yes.
and Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much. Item number 2 and 3 is the preliminary landmark recommendation for the Century and Consumers Building, Century Building at 202 South State and 220 South State Street. Before I call on Kendallin for a report, I want to remind you that on July 7th, the commission directed staff to prepare a preliminary summary of information reports for each of these buildings and present their findings to the commission. For expediency, I've asked that both of these informational reports be combined in one presentation. I want to indicate that at this time, after the reports and hearing some of the comments, I am not going to be calling for a vote on this item, on both these items today, and will direct staff on to continue some of their work. So with that, I'd like to call on Kendallin Hahn for the report, please.
Thank you, Chairman Wong. Okay, great. Joyce, you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Thank you. So although both the Century and Consumer buildings should be considered on an individual basis, certain aspects of their significance can be discussed in tandem. Both buildings were constructed in the last few years before the United States entered World War I. Both were speculative commercial buildings on the same block of State Street, and both are amongst the last skyscrapers considered to be part of the Chicago School of Architecture. The Century Building, which I'll talk about first, was built between 1915 and 1916 and designed by the architectural firm of Hollibird and Roche. Located at 202 South State Street, it sits at the southwest corner of Adams and State Streets. Beginning with Potter Palmer's purchase and improvement of 3/4 of a mile of State Street in 1867, retail in Chicago has been centered along this thoroughfare. As the city's population grew exponentially in the following decades, and the city expanded outward through annexation, centralization of rapid transit guaranteed the business and retail dominance of the city's historic center. The 1898 map at left shows the loop of elevated tracks encircling the central business district, used by multiple elevated lines branching out to different parts of the city. Demand for space in the loop exerted pressure on real estate values, which in turn encouraged maximization of return on square footage, leading to the construction of ever taller buildings. As relatively affordable, small-scale, low-rise buildings, which housed middle and small-sized enterprises, disappears, investors saw opportunity and began building large-scale speculative commercial buildings, giving rise to the skyscraper. The image at right shows the 2 4-story structures in 1903, which would be replaced with the 16-story Century Building. The Century Building is an outstanding example of one type of these multi-tenant skyscrapers known as a tall shops building. Tall shops buildings were speculative high-rise structures designed to serve retailers by creating interior shopping streets. Handsome edifices with lavish entries and lobbies were designed to attract and encourage potential customers to enter and circulate through the building. Elegant display cases outside and inside the ground floor allowed upper floor tenants to advertise their wares or services. The rendering on the left in a brochure promoting the new Century Building showcases the marble cladding and intricate bronze fixtures of the elevator lobby with built-in display pieces on the right. On upper floors, glass corridor walls of the tenant spaces functioned like shop windows, as seen in the Hollibird and Roche drawing at the upper right of a typical Century Building corridor. Free from the vagaries of outside weather, noise, and bustle, this early vertical version of an indoor mall allowed shoppers to move from one floor to the next as they perused goods and services. Tall shops buildings were marketed to small and mid-sized merchants, wholesalers, and service providers who desired the advantages of locating on State Street, but for whom costly street-level space did not make economic sense. Tenants enjoyed the advantages of single ownership in terms of scale of operation and building management, while shared amenities within the building, such as restaurants, doubled as a draw for potential customers. The postcard at bottom right shows the mirrored walls of the basement level cafeteria located beneath the building's corner drugstore. The Century Building was built as a commercial investment property by the Buck and Rayner drug manufacturing and retailing firm. The company already had 2 corner drugstores on State Street, one at Madison, another at Randolph. The corner ground floor space at 202 South gave them their 3rd at Adams. High-rise tall shops and the more ubiquitous professional office buildings typically occupied compact corner lots on State Street. These tall, narrow skyscrapers contributed to the increasing density of State Street over the course of its evolution as Chicago's primary retail corridor. And together with the massive department store buildings occupying half or full block lots, they visually dominated the streetscape and created a distinctive street wall with canyon-like views. The Century Building was designed by Chicago architects William Holabird and Martin Roche, both of whom are recognized as innovative and prolific practitioners of the Chicago School of Architecture. Holabird and Roche was one of the most successful and prolific architectural firms in Chicago between 1883 and 1927. By the time the Century Building was completed in 1916, the firm was responsible for 5 to 10% of the construction taking place in the city. Holabird and Roche is one of the firms most responsible for shaping the look of State Street after the turn of the 20th century. The Century Building was one in a series of their steel frame, white glazed terracotta buildings, which they became known for, including the now demolished Republic Building and the extant North American Building, the Rothschilds department store, and the Waterman Building. Over a dozen of their buildings are designated as individual Chicago landmarks, including the Old Colony, the Marquette, the Chicago Building, the City Hall County Building, the Three Arts Club, and the Palmer House Hotel. In terms of architecture, the Century Building is a commercial style building. The commercial style embodies the fundamental components of what became known as the Chicago School of Architecture. Underlying this school were the advancements in construction methods and materials, which allowed buildings to grow taller, exterior walls to open up to allow in more light, and usable interior space to be maximized with fewer columns. At 16 stories, the Century Building was considered relatively tall for its time. Its steel frame allowed large openings for windows and also provided the building's structural support such that terracotta could be hung from the columns and horizontal beams to create a grid across the primary facades. Although the Century Building employs the steel frame, large window openings, and white glazed terracotta that characterized Holabird and Roche's State Street commercial buildings since 1900, it also signaled a change. The repeating narrow continuous mullions within each bay, the overall height of the structure relative to its width, and the darkening and recessing of spandrel panels so they visually recede relative to the verticals, gives the facade a striking emphasis on verticality, which will become central to the firm's skyscraper designs in the following decades. Not surprisingly, Chicago's Loop has the world's largest concentration of buildings from the Chicago School of Architecture, and the Century Building represents the final years of this movement, generally considered to end with the onset of the United States entry into World War I, where emphasis on the expression of the steel frame construction gave way to emphasis on verticality and sleek linear geometry, seen in much of the following decades' Art Deco skyscrapers. The Century Building displays a high level of detailing and craftsmanship in the late Gothic terracotta ornamentation at the building's exterior. It was one of dozens of loop structures built in the 2 decades leading up to World War I, featuring this terracotta cladding. Taken together, they represented the most extensive use of white glazed terracotta in the city. Permits were issued for storefront changes in 1934 and 1944. The wholesale change of storefronts, indeed even entire facades, has been a continuous phenomenon from State Street's earliest days. With the recovery of the economy after World War II, modernization of commercial spaces accelerated on State Street. Home Federal Savings purchased the Century Building in 1948. Non-original storefronts were replaced with a continuous storefront of regularly placed narrow floor-to-ceiling mullions securing large plate glass windows trimmed in stainless steel. At the State Street elevation, glass panels curved to form an S shape, arching out to align with the front plane of the building at the elevation's midpoint and intersecting with the smooth granite-clad recessed building entry at the south end. At the second floor, window openings were reconfigured to centered bands of fixed windows, divided by stainless steel mullions aligned with the storefront mullions below. The storefront of the Century Building is an excellent example of the translation of the international style to storefront design. New open front storefronts prioritize views inside, such that the interior commercial space became the display. Tall plate glass windows were employed as both window and architectural form. The Century Building's dramatic floor-to-ceiling curving plate glass storefront trimmed in stainless steel is an example par excellence of these ideas. The 1951-52 remodeling of the Century Building's first two floors, still intact today, reflects the optimism and prosperity of post-war America, when new was equated with better. Like other financial institutions of the era, appearing modern and efficient was seen as a way to attract customers. The unadorned, smooth lines of the international style were used to communicate this message. The Century Building's first and second floor exteriors are especially noteworthy as a rare surviving example of a mid-20th century commercial storefront remodeling on State Street. So viewing those first and second floor exterior alterations as significant in their own right, overall, the Century Building maintains substantial integrity. Absence of the original cornice as seen in these comparison photos is not unusual for buildings of this age and does not significantly impair the building's ability to convey its historic character. Portions of the terracotta cladding may be missing beneath aluminum panning installed over sections of the facade, but the majority of architectural terracotta cladding and decoration remains and imparts a strong sense of its original visual character. No major additions or alterations have been made to the building since the 1951-52 remodeling, leaving most historic features and finishes and the overall form, footprint, location of entrances, and arrangement of fenestration intact. The storefront itself is remarkably intact. Windows and some portion of the granite cladding at the north and east elevations of the second floor have been removed, but the reconfigured window openings remain. There is photographic documentation of the remodeling, and original cladding at the first floor remains to inform any future restoration work, so these losses can be considered reversible. The projecting steel canopy installed above the first floor is temporary and easily removed. So staff believe that the Century Building meets criteria 1 for heritage, 4 for architecture, 5 for significant architect, as well as the separate integrity criterion. As already mentioned, staff believes that the exterior and the 1951-52 storefront remodeling are intact and significant. This concludes my presentation on the Century Building, and now I will provide an overview of the Consumers Building. Built between 1911 and 1913, the Consumers Building was designed by Mundy and Jensen. The structure is located on the west side of the block between Adams and Jackson at 220 South State. At the time of its construction, Quincy Street, seen here from above with the Consumers Building on the right, was a through street, and both the south and east elevations of the building would have been street facing. In 1960, the City Council passed an ordinance to vacate the western half of Quincy for construction of a new federal courts building stretching from Adams to Jackson. The eastern half of Quincy became a pedestrian plaza. In 2017, a barrier was put up to prevent access to that plaza. As I previously noted, both the Century and Consumers buildings were speculative commercial buildings built within a few years of each other on the same block, and as a result, the same market forces were at play for each of them. Here you can see the existing 5-story structures, which would be taken down to make way for the Consumers Building. Developer Jacob L. Kesner commissioned the Consumers Building as a professional office building. After the turn of the 20th century, these professional office and tall shops buildings began to increase in number and typically were located at corners. With smaller footprints than department stores, these structures usually reached 15 to 25 stories. Maximum advantage was taken of valuable State Street frontage, so ground floors had large storefronts. Stairs also typically led to basement spaces utilized for commercial purposes. The lowest floors above the ground level included large expanses of glass for display or signage, and often stairs provided easy access to the public. Upper floors were open and could be subdivided to provide maximum flexibility so that tenants of all sizes could find space in the building. Tenant spaces with natural light and ventilation from windows were at a premium, so Kessner purchased the property directly north of the Consumers Building. By controlling that parcel, he could ensure that no building would encroach the Consumer Building's north elevation. And by centralizing the elevator core, fenestration was possible at all elevations, maximizing the desirability of all the square footage. And in the picture on the left, you can see the north elevation, which includes fenestration, and the west elevation. The State and Quincy Building, as it was first known, was rechristened as the Consumers Building in 1913. It was named for the coal and ice delivery company, which occupied the upper floors. The building is a prime example of a professional office building, a distinct building type important to the evolution of State Street, which reflects the symbiotic relationship between retail and professional services seen throughout State Street's history as Chicago's primary retail thoroughfare. The Consumers Building, like the Century Building, is a commercial style building in the tradition of the Chicago School of Architecture. Its steel frame is expressed on the exterior by the more solid grid-like pattern of continuous narrow vertical piers and horizontal spandrel bands. The overall height of the structure relative to its width, plus the widening of piers at the corners and the center of the east elevation, emphasize the vertical over the horizontal elements of the facade. Also, like the Century Building, the Consumers Building was one of dozens of loop structures. Do you want to advance that slide, Joyce? Thanks. One of dozens of loop structures built in the 2 decades leading up to World War I, featuring, again, white glazed terracotta. The Consumers Building displays a high level of detailing and craftsmanship in the classical revival terracotta ornamentation of the building's exterior. On the interior, the vestibule and lobby are especially noteworthy as a very rare surviving example of an early 20th century professional office building ground floor entry. The walls and ceilings are clad in white Carrara marble with geometric classical revival detailing, and a marble staircase is set into an alcove. Cross beams in the vestibule and lobby ceiling align with pilasters along the walls. Decorative bronze elements include door frames and lobby fixtures like baseboard grills, building directory, a mailbox, elevator detailing, and festooned sconces at each pilaster. The Consumers Building was designed by the architecture firm of Mundy and Jensen. William Mundy and Elmer Jensen were former partners of William LeBaron Jenney, a leader in the Chicago School of Architecture. William Bryce Mundy served as architect for the Chicago Board of Education from 1898 to 1904 and became a fellow of the American Institute of Architects. Architect Elmer C. Jensen's sense of responsibility to the larger profession of architecture earned him the title Dean of Chicago Architects. And the Chicago Tribune noted he was, quote, given about every honor members of his profession in Chicago have been able to bestow, unquote. Mundy and Jensen were among the handful of important designers enlisted by auto dealers to construct new showrooms in the automobile sales and service nexus of Motor Row, located south of the Loop. 6 of these are extant and located within the Chicago landmark Motor Row district. The Consumers Building was one of many loop structures designed by Mundy and Jensen, including the Municipal Courts Building, the Kessner Building, the Lemoyne Building, the Singer Building, and the Union League Club, all of which are extant. During their nearly 3 decades-long partnership, Mundy and Jensen was one of the most prolific architectural firms in Chicago after the turn of the 20th century, known not only for their loop skyscrapers, but for their industrial, bank, and residential buildings. With regard to the integrity of the consumer building, there have been no major additions or alterations, so the building maintains its overall historic form and appearance, including window and entrance locations. The missing cornice, as well as original windows and storefronts, are not unusual for buildings of this age, and their absence does not significantly impair the building's ability to convey its historic character. The exterior retains the majority of its architectural terracotta and decoration and imparts a strong sense of the original visual character. The main entrance vestibule and elevator lobby retain an unusually high degree of integrity and are an extremely rare surviving example of an original early 20th century office building vestibule and lobby. Staff believe that the Consumers Building meets criteria 1 for heritage, 4 for architecture, and 5 for significant architect, as well as the separate integrity criterion. As already mentioned, staff believes that the exterior and the main entrance vestibule and elevator lobby are intact and significant. This concludes my presentation. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Kendallin. Does the commission have any questions for Kendallin at this time?
Not a question, just much gratitude, Kendallin, for really thoughtful reports that were easy to read about something that was pretty complex. Both of them, I really appreciate it. And it reminded me as I was reading both reports, just what a great job the entire historic preservation staff does, taking so much information and presenting it so thoughtfully and so clearly to us. So I'm very appreciative.
Thank you.
You're muted, Chairman, if you're talking.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. We have received statements from the GSA and from Chief Judge Rebecca Paulmeyer, which I would like to read into the record. First is the letter from Regina McNally, the Historic Preservation Officer of the GSA for the Great Lakes region. GSA provides the following statement regarding the Commission of Chicago Landmarks proposed preliminary landmark recommendation for the Century and Consumers buildings located respectively at 202 and 220 South State Street in Chicago, Illinois. GSA has long acknowledged the historic and architectural significance of these historic properties. We recognize that these two buildings are identified as contributing properties under criteria A and C at the local, what did I do here? At the local level of significance to the National Register of Historic Places listed Loop Retail Historic District. As such, local significance will be acknowledged and considered during the consultation process required by Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act, NHPA. As the lead federal agency for the Section 106 process, GSA will impartially conduct the NHPA process. GSA remains formally neutral on the Commission's proposal to designate the buildings as landmarks under its criteria. However, we acknowledge that such a designation is not inconsistent with the manner in which buildings are characterized and protected under the NHPA. The Section 106 process directs GSA and other federal agencies to consider viable alternatives to the proposed undertaking and seek agreement on how to resolve adverse effects to historic properties, including demolition, and their context prior to the agency's final decision on a proposed action. Any agreement among consulting parties that is reached through Section 106 consultation process will necessarily include measures that meet the security requirements of the adjacent federal courthouse and other adjacent federal properties. We recognize there is strong interest in these historic properties from the City of Chicago, the Commission on Chicago Landmarks, and the broader preservation community. Meetings with the public and consulting parties will be scheduled by GSA in the coming weeks. Public notices with dates and locations for public meetings will be published locally and distributed to all identified consulting parties. If the Commission would like to recommend consulting parties, they should be sent through the City of Chicago Department of Planning Historic Preservation Division for coordination with the GSA. We appreciate this opportunity to address the Commission on these properties. And I believe that Ms. Nally, you're here today. Is there anything further you'd like to add?
I'm sorry, Chairman Wong, she had a conflict and was not able to attend today.
Okay. The next letter is from Chief Judge Rebecca R. Paulmeyer, the Chief Judge of the Northern District of Illinois. Statement of the federal court. We recognize the value of preserving architecture of note, including our own Dirksen Courthouse, the only courthouse designed by renowned designer Mies van der Rohe. We remain concerned, however, by the grave safety and security risks posed by the 202 and 220 South State Street buildings, and by the difficulties of repurposing these buildings in any way consistent with the numerous recognized security concerns. We also see significant value to the public, the court, and the State Street Retail District in orienting the entrance of the Dirksen Courthouse to the east, the side intended by Mies to serve as an entrance. Doing so would promote robust foot traffic in a now quiet corridor of State Street. With that, Chief Judge Paulmeyer, did you wish to make any additional statements? Your Honor? Mr. Bruton. Mansour, can you allow Mr. Bruton to speak?
Yes, Mr. Bruton has his microphone is unmuted, but we cannot hear.
Good afternoon.
Okay.
Yes.
I wanted to let. My name is Thomas Bruton. I'm the clerk of the court for the U.S. District Court in Chicago. I wanted to let you know that first, the presentation by your staff was excellent, and we really appreciate that. Number two, Chief Judge Paulmeyer had to just step back into the courtroom. She has a jury trial, so I wanted to make sure the commission knew that she had been on the line the entire time and listening to the comments, but just about 5 minutes ago had to go back into the courtroom. But we appreciate all the efforts. We look forward to working with all the consulting parties, and I appreciate your time today of all the efforts that you and your staff have put forth.
Thank you, Mr. Bruton. So I had indicated at the beginning of this report that I am not going to ask for a motion to take a vote. The reports presented by staff clearly establish the criteria for potential landmark recommendations. When we landmark a building, we designate those features which should be protected. Given the highly unusual circumstances with these federally owned properties, it seems to me that we need far more specificity regarding the perceived safety issues to be able to initiate a designation process that helps these buildings to be rehabilitated in a way which provides reasonable and necessary security for the courthouse to the west. Obviously, neither the commission nor the city has addressed an issue quite like this, and we should make every effort to ensure that our process is as informed as possible from the outset, including how preservation and other resources should serve to mitigate those issues. Before moving forward with any formal action, I'd like to ask the staff to work with relevant city and federal agencies to identify specific safety issues as the Section 106 process moves forward. By exploring those concerns as well as potential solutions, I think we can best understand how this process should move forward. And with that, we end our this item on the agenda, and I'd like to move forward with the next agenda item. Commissioner
Chair, I'm sorry, I had my hand up.
Yes, sir.
I know that there's a lot you're juggling there, but I did want to offer a comment because Kendall, and it was an excellent report. I would concur with the observations being made. I could not help but think of the Mies van der Rohe chapter of this story. because at that time, he purposefully located his high-rise, one of the first high-rise courthouses in the country, in relationship to the context he was working. However, he could never have anticipated the security concerns that we are trying to manage today. And I think as a future presentation, it would be fascinating to hear from a historian who can explain to us what Mies van der Rohe was trying to do, because he did not, certain buildings were demolished to make way for grand plazas. Other buildings were retained as a part of the pattern of the block. But I agree with the chair. I mean, given some of the profound kind of security concerns that we live with today and the kind of unique development pattern that's characterized now for that block, that we shouldn't take an action without understanding this broader context and what these buildings pose relative to legitimate concerns that have been raised by their neighbors. So I think in this particular case, we have the benefit of time and a public, both local and federal process that will give us more information so that we feel comfortable that we have all of the component parts to make a decision, to make a final deliberation on this. But I think the report has beautifully laid out that the properties themselves are meritorious of landmark status. So we won't be questioning that. I think we can question what are our opportunities to mitigate some of the concerns, including recommendations for preservation. So again, I think it is wise, Chairman Wong, for us to let this information sit, gather more information, particularly around the issues of concern, and position ourselves to then move forward with a recommendation at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Commissioner Cox. Commissioner Hughes, you had your hand up. Please go ahead. You are muted. Commissioner Hughes?
Yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Sorry. I was just gonna say, I vividly remember the last discussion that I was a part of involving these structures. And I distinctly remember us giving names of advocacy groups in both the architecture space and the preservation space as options that are, or as resources that GSA and others can go to lean on and to learn more. So I would be interested in the future in hearing an update on that. And to Commissioner Cox's point, what was explored as far as what can be preserved and what's their lens on that based on some of the groups that we've given them to go to. So I'm not sure if that can be a part of the request for the next discussion that we have about this, but what exploratory purposes, and to your point too as well, Mr. Chairman, what is the extent of the damage and what is the cost going to be to remedy that? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any other comments regarding this item? If not, I'd like to move forward with the item number 4, the citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application for the Onleong Merchants Association building in the 25th Ward. This is located at 2216 South Wentworth Avenue. And Dan Kleiber, if you could give us a presentation.
Good afternoon. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Thank you, Chairman Wong, and good afternoon, Commissioners. In 2019, we informed you of 4 projects that DPD conditionally awarded grants to from the 2019 Adopt a Landmark application funding round. You may recall that each of the projects are required to come back to the Commission for a vote once their scope and budget are fully developed. One of the applicants, Pewtek Center, along with the Chinese Christian Union Church, the owner of the An Liang Merchants Association building at 2216 South Wentworth, have finalized a budget and scope for their project. Pewtek Center is requesting $250,000 in Adopt a Landmark funds for exterior envelope work totaling approximately $800,000. It should be noted that the project was delayed due to the timing of a state grant that is necessary for the project's financing, as well as the pandemic, but DPD is happy to report that it is ready to move now in 2022. For orientation, the An Liang Merchants Association building is located at 2216 South Wentworth within the Armour Square community area and the 25th Ward in the heart of Chinatown. The building was completed in 1926 and built to accommodate multiple uses. It is considered the oldest and most prominent physical symbol of Chicago's Chinese heritage and is clad in a variety of colorful terracotta elements. It was designated a Chicago landmark in 1993. Based on an assessment completed by Wiss Janney Elsner in 2019, the Adopt a Landmark scope of work for the project includes two main exterior envelope components, terracotta and other masonry, as well as canopy restoration work. The slide before you shows a representative sample of the existing conditions of the terracotta and masonry units that will be addressed, including cracked terracotta, deteriorating mortar joints, and spalling. More specifically, this image shows the east elevation along Wentworth Avenue and the precise locations of the terracotta and other masonry work, as well as the canopy work, which I will go into in more detail in a moment. The color-coded elevations show which specific terracotta units will either be completely replaced, reset, patched, or otherwise repaired. Before you now is the south elevation along 22nd Place, showing the exact locations of the masonry work on this side of the building. And finally, here is the additional north elevation terracotta and masonry work. In terms of the canopy work, the cast iron canopy has already been dismantled, but it will be cleaned, repaired as needed, rehung with stainless steel anchorages, as well as be given a roof replacement. The resolution before you to grant the Adopt a Landmark funds to the applicant includes an Exhibit A, which outlines the scope of work and budget, which I just summarized, and which includes $250,000 in grant funds for the $800,934 project. This resolution and drawings were included in your packets. Other funding sources include a State of Illinois capital grant and the Pewtek Center Chinese Christian Church's own funds. In addition, Exhibit A includes the main conditions associated with the project. In summary, the conditions are that all work must be submitted to DPD for prior review and approval. The work must be done in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. The applicant will notify staff of any undocumented conditions. The applicant will enter into an escrow agreement to assure the project is completed and paid for in a timely manner, and that the applicant will provide to DPD the necessary documentation of the project so that staff can also give an informational overview of the project to the commission once completed. Should you vote to approve the project, the department will then enter into a written agreement with the applicant that will incorporate the resolution. The main work is scheduled to start this fall and continue into 2023. Again, the project is located in the 25th Ward, and Alderman Cito Lopez is here today with us to speak about the project. In addition, WJE, as well as David Wu from Pewtek Center and Alex Leung from the church are all here. And of course, I am here and happy to answer any questions that you may have about the grant agreement process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Does the commission have any questions for Dan? If not, Alderman Cito Lopez, would you like to make a comment?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead, Alderman.
All right, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak in front of the Commission on Chicago Landmarks. Thank you again for taking on this item. As you know, the Pewtek Center, it has been an icon in the Chinatown community. Is one of the features that has made the social fabric of the Chinatown community a nationally renowned a landmark. By the arches, with the services that they provide in our community for ESL migrants, for immigration support, for cultural events, for community events, period. It is a landmark in our community for many reasons. The work that do day in and day out for our community is invaluable, but as a physical structure, it is important that we provide the resources that are needed to preserve such an icon. As you know, the Chinatown community is the only Chinatown in the country that is growing and continues to grow because of the hard work and perseverance of community organizations like the Pewtek Center, who has been leading efforts in our community. And again, the physical space is something that is also important to continue to preserve spaces like this in our community. So I just came to express our full support for this item. I want to thank the Department of Planning as well for making the consideration, Commissioner Cox, and all the commissioners to make this consideration. And our office fully supports, with the support of the community, this designation. And I hope that we can also identify funding to make sure that this building can remain in our community for as long as we can. It's been a real pleasure for me to represent the Chinatown community. I know the new older person will also be more than happy to have the privilege to represent a beautiful community, and having these spaces preserved are a fundamental part of this preservation plan. So I hope that you consider a favorable recommendation on this item. And again, thank you to all the commissioners, the Department of Planning, and everyone to make this a consideration for our community. Thank you again.
Thank you, Alderman. Does any of the commission have any questions for Alderman Sucre Lopez? And having none, Mr. Wu, would you like to take the floor, please?
Yes, my name is David Wu. I'm the executive director of the Poituck Center. About 30 years ago, the Chinese Christian Union Church purchased the honor building from the federal government. There's very interesting history that I won't go through, but in addition to the church is hoped to expand space for their religious programs. They started the Poituck Center to serve the community, and we serve about 5,000 people each year. Both the church and the center realize that we're stewards of the most important building representing the Asian American community in Chicago, and probably the most significant building for Asian Americans nationwide. We're actually working on a national designation to be on the National Registry for Historic Places. We're hoping to finish that so that this building could be more well-known and tell the story of Asian Americans, not only in Chicago, but nationwide. The project is complicated because we're trying to balance the commission's grant structure as well as the state's grant structure. So that's been some of the delay, but we're excited that the project's moving forward. Dan mentioned that this project is $800,000. Sadly, that's not the cost of what it needs to bring the entire building back to its original kind of soundness. There still needs to be additional work, but the support from the Landmark Commission as well as the state gives us resources. About 10 years ago, the church and the center spent about $600,000 to do terracotta work, and then about 3 years ago, spent $400,000 to repair the flat portion of the roof that you can't see from the street. So we are committed to maintaining and stewarding properly, and appreciate your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Wu. Does any of the commission have any questions for Mr. Wu? Mr. Leung? Would you like to say
Hi.
anything?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We sure can. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. Yeah, I am the building chairman, part of the trustee board of the Chinese Christian Union Church that owns the Onlyon building, which is where we house the Poituck Center. That is also the building, as a couple of people have already mentioned, where critical community support work and critical community service work is being done. And thanks to David Wu and company, we have helped numerous immigrants and community members within Chinatown and outside of Chinatown to receive a lot of assistance that is critically needed within the community. And so I'm not going to repeat what David had already mentioned. I just want to say that as owner of the building, we are fully committed to preserving the integrity and the historical significance of the building. And as David had mentioned, we've already invested quite a bit in the building, and will continue to do so. But at the same time, the grant that's on the table, it's very important for us, as the resources from the church is recently, is a little bit more limited. So this is really appreciated if we can receive the grant, and then we can move forward with the restoration and the project that we have already started. So with that, I'll close. And again, I want to thank everyone for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Long. Does the commission have any questions for Mr. Long? Yes, or without further ado, then I'd like to call for a motion to approve the resolution for the citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund grant for the Onlyon Merchants Association building at 2216 South Wentworth Avenue. Is there a motion?
So moved. Commissioner
Thank
Jakowicz.
you, Commissioner Jakowicz. Is there a second?
Second, Commissioner Ponce.
Second by Commissioner Ponce. I'll do the roll call. Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Yes.
Commissioner Hughes.
Enthusiastically, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Tolliver.
Yes.
And I am a yes. It is unanimous. Congratulations, folks. I'm looking forward to it. And I've seen this building, what is it, the last 3 days in a row. So looking forward to it.
So Commissioner Wong, I did want to say that it's such an honor to finally have an historic asset from Chinatown on the dais. I have been waiting for this for 3 years. And I just want to commend and applaud the owners for bringing it forward. I'm thrilled that we can contribute to the preservation of the project. And I know that there are other buildings in Chinatown that are meritorious. So hopefully those owners will see what you've been able to do, follow your lead, and bring us other buildings forward. But I'm just so pleased to finally see a piece of Chinatown on our agenda.
Thank you, Commissioner. All right, let's go to the next item, which notes are all over the place today. Okay, item number 5, the citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund application for the Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, located at 4501 South Vincennes Avenue in the 3rd Ward. And Dan, take it away, please.
Good afternoon again, Dan Kleiber. At the December 2021 Commission meeting, we informed you of 12 projects that DPD conditionally awarded grants to from the 2021 Adopt a Landmark application funding round. One of those applicants, Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church, has finalized the budget and scope for their project. Ebenezer is requesting $900,000 in Adopt a Landmark funds for exterior envelope work totaling $1,187,560. For orientation, Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church is located at 4501 South Vincennes Avenue, which is the southeast corner of East 45th Street and South Vincennes within the Grand Boulevard community area and the 3rd Ward. Constructed in 1899 and designed by Dankmar Adler, the building was originally a synagogue known as Isaiah Temple, but has been the home of Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church since 1921. The building's rich history includes being known as the place of the first modern gospel choir in 1931, thanks in part to Tommy Dorsey, and among the many gospel singers who performed at Ebenezer was Mahalia Jackson, known as the Queen of Gospel. The building was designated a Chicago landmark in 2011. Overall, the Adopt a Landmark scope of work for the project includes significant masonry and roof work, 2 main critical exterior envelope components that were identified from an assessment of the structure made by Wisjani Elsner in 2021. Before you is a roof plan to help orient you and show an overall image of the work from above. The purple hatch marks show the location of the eave, downspout, and gutter work on the perimeter of the main sanctuary building space. The building's eaves will be replaced throughout this area. The blue shows the location of the flashing and associated roof work on the annex portion of the building to the east, where the parapet walls will be rebuilt on the north and east sides, and the southern portion of the main sanctuary portion of the building, where a new protective stabilization netting will also be installed. Finally, the gray shows the main roof itself over the sanctuary space, which will be completely replaced with new decking and shingles. Taking a look at street view, on the west facade again, the purple shows the location of the eave and downspout work on the main sanctuary portion of the building. At right are select images of the existing condition of the eaves, which will be addressed. On the north facade, in red, you can see the location of the parapet wall to be rebuilt on the annex building, as well as the flashing and associated roof work planned for the tops of this rebuilt parapet wall, highlighted in blue. In addition, this facade view shows the main chimney in the middle of the building, which will be evaluated and tuck pointed as needed. On the east facade, or again the alley side of the annex building, the parapet wall will also be rebuilt and additional chimney work will occur on the main chimney on the southern portion of the building as indicated on the image to the left. The image in the middle shows the interface between the main pitched roof and the flat roof portion of the annex building, along with the aforementioned roof tear-off and eave work. Finally, the photos on the right show the existing conditions of the east parapet wall at top and the chimneys on the bottom. The resolution before you to grant the Adopt a Landmark funds to the applicant includes an Exhibit A, which outlines the scope of work and budget, which I just summarized, and which includes $900,000 in grant funds for the $1,187,560 project. This resolution and drawings were included in your packets. It should be noted here that due to the size of the proposed award, this project will also require City Council approval. In addition, Exhibit A includes the main conditions associated with the project. In summary, the conditions are that all work must be submitted to DPD for prior review and approval. The work must be done in accordance with the Secretary of the Interior standards. The applicant will notify staff of any undocumented conditions. The applicant will enter into an escrow agreement to assure the project is completed and paid for in a timely manner, and that the applicant will provide to DPD the necessary documentation of the project so that staff can also give an informational overview of the project to the commission once completed. Should you vote to approve the project, the department will then enter into a written agreement with the applicant that will incorporate the resolution. Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church anticipates beginning work in the spring of 2023. Again, the project is located in the 3rd Ward, and Alderwoman Dowell is here today with us to speak about the project. In addition, WJE, the project architect, is here, along with church leadership members, including Pastor Person. And I am happy to answer any questions that you may have about the grant agreement process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Does the commission have any questions of Dan at this time? Seeing none.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Apologies. I do have a question. If Dan could go back to the site plan, site context, it would be helpful to understand, do we know the ownership of the vacant parcels? Go back to one more to the context. Yes. Do we know anything about the ownership of the vacant parcels around the church? Meaning, is one of them serving as parking and it's owned by the church, or is it a city-owned lot, et cetera, et cetera?
Commissioner Cox, actually, a little bird told me you might ask me, so I did look that up. The lot directly across the street from Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church on the north side of 45th, that's that pin, you can lightly see it, 007. That is actually city-owned parcel. Yes, that large parcel right there. There is another vacant one to the north of that, 006, which is privately owned, I believe, by a development company. On the other side of Vincennes to the west, as far as I can tell, the large property there is owned by the church. But then there are two more smaller properties immediately to the south, which actually are also owned by the city. Again, as far as the records that I have at the time.
Thank you. So when we open up discussion, I'll return to those lots at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is Alderman Dahl or a representative from the Alderman's office available or wish to speak? If not, I'll go Pastor Person. Is there anything further you'd like to say?
Yes, sir.
Please,
again, I want
to go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you. I want to say again, thank you for your consideration of our project. We enjoy the support of our aldermen and the community. Ebenezer has been a fixture in that community since 1902, June of 1902. I am a fifth generation of Ebenezer, having come back 3 years ago to serve now as the senior pastor of the church. It is our desire to restore our great edifice so that we can do the work that God has given to our hands. It is our desire to continue to be a community hub as we once were during the Great Migration. Many African Americans came up from the South and fellowshiped and became a part of Ebenezer during that time. And certainly as we have gone through this pandemic, we have opened our doors to provide support to the community as it relates to shots being provided, blood drives going on, and so many other things. And so as we look to this post-pandemic future, this will be an incredible opportunity for us and our faith community to rectify our building so that we can continue to do great work in the Bronzeville community. And so it is our hope, and it is indeed our prayer that you will support this. Let me thank you in advance again for your consideration of Ebenezer for this monumentally generous grant.
Thank you, Pastor Person. Does the commission have any questions of Pastor Person? If none, I will open it up for...
The commission is quiet today.
Go ahead, Commissioner. Oh, wait a minute. Now you're calling people out.
I'm sorry. No, I just wanted to again, I know these are extraordinary times for our faith-based community as they try to come back from COVID and rebuild their population, open their doors again. And it's so important that the buildings, the edifice themselves, are there for your congregation to come back to, so that you're able to see the importance of your stewardship of that church and the need for continual investment, so that you will continue to be there. I think it's inspiring, and again, I just thank you for having the foresight to do that. And I know that the reason why I asked about all the parcels adjacent to it, I know sometimes those are hidden assets as well. And we are increasingly working with the faith-based community to really understand how they might maximize the land resources they have. So in addition to preserving the church, are there other needs? And with the right partnership of development partners, could you maximize that and really allow for a kind of continuum of resources to anchor the church? And so, you know, we're just coming back from last week, Mayor inaugurated Mahalia Jackson Court. The Mahalia Jackson Court, again, the Queen of Gospel, the land that we inaugurated was owned by Carter Temple. And because of the relationship of that pastor who said, I want to do something beyond my church edifice, we were able to forge that partnership. And then from there, other investments are imagined. So I think whenever we have a congregation that is digging in deep their roots and thinking about the future, that we should zoom out just a little bit and see what other things we can do to assure the permanence of your congregation. So that is an invitation to explore a little bit the corner block strategy. Once we get your church preserved in the way that you've envisioned it, you've challenged us to go beyond the $250,000 grant. I'm thrilled to see the staff bring that recommendation forward. It has a slightly different process because it has to go before council, but it is appropriately scaled for the ambition and the aspirations that you have. So again, thank you for pushing the envelope on what we mean by grant-anchored preservation.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Commissioner Cox. Commissioner Hughes.
Yes, my apologies. I didn't realize my hand was still up from before, so you didn't see me raise it again. But I just want to say I 100% support everything that's happening right now at the Ebenezer Church. And these types of projects are really important to me because, you know, communities like Bronzeville and historically Black communities have experienced so much erasure throughout time. And our churches, you know, are epicenters. They are the anchors. They are the ones that some of the structures that still exist that we can leverage and preserve and can still be that community anchor. So I 100% support this, and I'm excited to cast my vote. So moved already, but yes, thank you guys.
Thank you, Commissioner Hughes. Commissioner Ponce.
Yes, good afternoon. And I'm also very excited to see this project at this point. And I'd like to congratulate, you know, everyone involved to bring it to this point. And I'm still very touched by Ms. Melton's words earlier. And, you know, it's a very emotional thing. It's very important for not just the church, the building, but for the community. And Reverend Person, you said 5th generation? Wow. See, I mean, that's something that you're not only preserving a building, but you're preserving culture, family, community. And so I congratulate everyone on where we are today. And I can't wait to see where we are going tomorrow.
Thank you, Commissioner Ponce. Did anybody else want to make a comment or have any other questions? This is a wonderful project, and I'd love to request a motion to approve a resolution for a citywide Adopt a Landmark Fund grant for the Ebenezer Missionary Baptist Church at 4501 South Vincennes.
So moved.
Is there a motion?
So
Commissioner
moved,
Tolliver,
Commissioner Hughes.
and second by Commissioner Hughes. Let's do the roll call. Commissioner Drekowitz.
Yes.
Commissioner Cox.
Yes.
Commissioner Burns.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Ponce.
Yes.
And I am a yes. It is unanimous. Pastor Person and your congregation, congratulations. Move on to the next step to wow met City Council as well. So
Thank you so very much to all.
Okay. Good luck with you. Okay. Next item is the Permit Review Committee reports, and I'd like to call in Vice Chair Commissioner Tekowitz for the report, please.
All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman. The Permit Review Committee reviewed 3 projects at its August 4th, 2022 meeting. All 3 projects were approved with conditions, and the report summarizing the scope of the proposed projects and committee's decisions was included in your packets, and this report is for information and for the record.
Thank you, Commissioner. Is there, and then the report on the permit decisions, Joyce, you have that for us?
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the month of August, staff reviewed 191 permit applications. A total of 211 reviews were performed by staff, and the average number of days to issue approval or corrections was 3.6 days.
Wow. You almost broke 200.
Almost, so close.
Almost, so close. Thank you so much. And then finally, the announcement, the program committee's review of suggestions received from the public for Chicago Landmark designation and nominations to the National Register of Historic Places will be held on Thursday, September 22nd at 1 o'clock. It will be virtual. See chicago.gov/CCL for the link. In the event that a gubernatorial disaster declaration is no longer in effect on September 22nd, thereby disallowing remote participation in public meetings. Attendance at this meeting will change from remote to in-person only. If this happens, location information will be provided on the Commission on Chicago Landmarks website at chicago.gov/CCL. Deadlines for the submissions is Friday, September 9th at 4 o'clock. All suggestions must be submitted on the suggestion form available at Chicago Landmarks website at chicago.gov/DPD. With no further business, I'd like to request a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All right. And Commissioner Tolliver and Commissioner Hughes, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
Aye.
And we're off to the races. Commissioner Tekowitz, when is the permit review?
Let's start the Permit Review Committee at 3 o'clock.
Okay, sounds good. And sounds like you have a quorum.
I believe so.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you, sir. All
Thank
right.
you.
Take care.
Bye.